3, 4, 5, Big Johnny Beef, my favorite.
What's up, nerds and nerdettes and wee little nerdlings all? It's your buddy Big Johnny G, the Two Gun Fix-It presents Legendary Gaming.
My number 5 favorite game that feels like Dungeons and Dragons. By Thunderwork Games, Role Player. Now, first and foremost, this is the only board game RPG character creation simulator that I know of, that I'm aware of, that I've ever seen, much less played. And that's why it made the number 5 spot on this list, because it's one aspect. Sure, it's laser focused, and it is the most amazing version of a tabletop dice chucker that I can imagine for a simple character creator. It's a really fun game. A couple of great expansions for this as well, and it feels like sitting down and making a Dungeons and Dragons character, only with luck factor in there, with the roll of the dice and the choosing of cards in order to round out your character. Now, the characters you can create are very familiar, and they're new and unique at the same time. And I'm not just talking about the racial characters, the species of the characters, but also as well as their classes are all very familiar. Their alignments, just like a classic Dungeons and Dragons character of your alignment, all these things come together, whether they're familiar or whether they're new and different, like the lion folk. And it still feels like you're sitting there creating a Dungeons and Dragons character. And I love the fact that it does mix familiar with new. And this way I can either go old school style, or I could try something completely different and go off page. And I love doing both of those in games like this because I have the opportunity to. I also enjoyed the way it as a series had advanced from the basic core game with the character creation to the monsters and minions game, where they did that exactly, where they added in monsters and minions for you to fight during the course of the game, and the fiends and familiars, which add just that, little demonic imp-like creatures that kind of curse you, as well as familiars that can bolster you. And the way that it could have been all in one game, which would have been huge, clunky, and a little expensive all at once. So the fact that they did break it all out, it really did make sense to me. And I'm glad that they gave us the opportunity to bring everything together. In fact, they brought it together in such a way that with their other game, Role Player Adventures, you can take these role player characters and go have actual RPG-style adventures with them. And if you don't have this base game of Role Player, you can still make characters on the fly for Role Player Adventure and go do the adventures. So the way these two games are independent of each other and yet still complete each other like puzzle pieces, I just love it. It's absolutely amazing that they do that, and I'm so glad that they did do it that way. And I also got to say that I find the art style in this game really cool. And that's because, although I'm not saying it looks like, maybe you can understand the difference here, right? I'm not saying that it looks like, but I'm saying it is reminiscent. There's something about this art that reminds me of the more classic 80s and 90s style TSR Dungeons and Dragons Elmore-inspired artwork. And, whenever a game has really good artwork, it does kind of make you want to play the game more because you want to look at it. And in this case, the artwork is great to begin with. And if you're, an old schooler grognog like me, then you're going to find something in this that looks fun and familiar from the old school days. Altogether, these factors come together to make a really good D&D style experience. And even though it's confined to just one aspect, character creation, for this game, I still think it's wonderful to have here on the list. If you're looking for a D&D style board game, you might want to start with a role player. And my number 4 favorite game that feels like Dungeons & Dragons, Rock Manor Games' Set a Watch. Now, like the previous title, this also does a fantastically perfect job of capturing one particular moment of Dungeons & Dragons. This one is a completely different moment than the last one. This one is right in the middle of gameplay. This is where you and your party bed down for the night. Who's taking watch? Is a classic and standard question during a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Us DMs want to know who's taking which watch in which order, what times. Then you're going to hear a series of rolls behind the screen. So this captures that moment not only in a board game, but it encapsulates it completely. Encapsulates it. I can say that word. Encapsulates it completely inside its own box. So I feel like this is a real tower defense style game. I really don't have that in my collection. So I guess in a sense, this is probably my first tower defense style game. And I'm glad this is my first one because I've really enjoyed this game a lot. And to take this one Dungeons and Dragons, or I guess any fantasy RPG style game, and to make it in a board game in and of itself, and counting in the campfire, the size of the campfire, how much light it is producing, so you can see what's coming at you, what's trying to stop you in the middle of the night from your quest, what's trying to stop you permanently. And this does just a great job capturing that very moment. You do feel a certain level of tension in this game because of that, and I love that. I enjoy the characters. I haven't played the game through with all of the characters yet, but the ones I've played I've really enjoyed. And one of the things I like about it is not only do we have familiar style characters in the game, but we also have ones that aren't necessarily all that familiar, like the Beastmaster. It really does remind me of 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons, when the character classes all were advanced into having kits, which was the precursor for the prestige classes in 3rd edition. And that's definitely the feel I had. I was playing with core classes and kits in this game, and that appealed to the old grognard in me. Of course it did. This is also fun because it incorporates the campfire in a way, in a sense that it's a resource, right? You have to keep feeding the fire. And I do enjoy resource management games to a certain degree. And this one I do enjoy because it makes thematic sense. The fire is literally dying out. You have so much firewood, and you need to use it. And some of these monsters are stealing your firewood. Yeah, because they want it as dark as possible. So you're running out of firewood, and therefore the fire is getting smaller, and the danger is getting closer. And as a built-in sort of timer, in a sense, it brings that level of tension to such a good boil, I think, without going overboard, because it is, if you play smart and you pay attention, it is manageable. Now, this game plays cooperatively, and you can play it solo. I feel that it does kind of fall into one of the lazy categories. I think that's what I want to call it. Lazy categories, in the sense that, yes, it can be soloed, but the way you solo it is just pretending that you're 1 or 2 or 3 of your buddies and just control everyone's character at once. Yeah, you could do that. And you're going to have fun. I've done it and I've had fun, but you can have a lot more fun when you're not dividing your attention between 4 characters. So the fact that they didn't do something to tweak the rules to make a more original sort of one-player game. And maybe I'm a little spoiled because of Tiny Epic Galaxies. They did that beautifully, I think, with enough tweaks in the rules so that the one-player game does play differently enough that you're not having to use several all at once. And I wish something like that was happening here, because I feel like the solo game could be better than having to divide your attention through all those characters. But it's still fun, and I still enjoy it, and I still play it, and I know it's going to be hitting the table solo again. Because it is a good game, and in this aspect, it definitely reminds me of Dungeons & Dragons. So, if you want to try that experience, then go check out Set a Watch. My number 3 favorite game that feels like Dungeons & Dragons. Fundamental Games' Legends of Novus. So this is I love this game because this is a world questing game. And I'm not the biggest fan of outdoor modules, outdoor adventures in Dungeons & Dragons, to tell you the truth. I thrive on the dungeon scene, and I'm also really good with the cityscapes. But when you start dealing with, the hexed out countryside, that doesn't do anything to really get to me. But this game takes that aspect of world exploration and world questing and puts it in a tabletop format that I actually do enjoy. Then again, I'm not DMing it, so that might also have something to do with my enjoyment of it. But it is a fun style that I don't normally partake in the RPG world. Like I said, I would just rather set something in a city, set something in a dungeon, and all the overland quest stuff, just do as quickly and lazily as I can because I don't want to deal with that myself. Sorry, that's the way I am as a DM, but this does get my attention for it. It makes me look forward to questing overland. Now, this game also has a great selection of characters, and your class, when you reach, 10 experience points, you get to promote yourself into a new prestige kind of class. And they're all really great advancements on the basic class that you're choosing. And some of them are accessible by one class, some of them are accessible by maybe 2 or 3 classes are able to join into these. So the variety of it, from where you start as a class to where you can go as like a specialist kind of thing, is kind of open-ended. For the limited amount of choices that they have in the game, it really maximizes your ability to cross over one character class to another specialty class and then try the game again, and things are going to be different. And just the fact that it pulls it off, I think is really great, and it makes me look forward to really figuring out which class I want to play and what the hell I'm going to do with this character once I get the 10 experience points. Now, this game is no walk in the park. It does dish out some major damage to you, whether you're playing solo or cooperatively, that I've found. Now, the game is set up in such a way that I really like how fast the turns go. I've played so many games where you get bogged down during your player's turn because you have so many things that have to happen, boom, 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 in this order, that order, and then finally you can pass it off to the other player. But this flies. You watch any of my games on this that I've live streamed, and you'll see exactly how fast, turn by turn, just flies by. Because there are so many things that you can do, like in the beginning and the end of your turn, that are kind of similar. If you do it once, you usually don't need to do it again, usually. And that cuts down the amount of player time on your turn, and it just gets you right into the beef of traveling or exploring. And that's exactly what it is. That's the beef of the game, the quests, going from one part of this world to another. And it just, it does. It pulls it together. It pulls it together really good. Now, through the quests that you're doing, it also does a pretty good job of turning this into a kind of a story that you can put together, going from quest to quest. And that strings everything together, I think, very nicely from the beginning of the game right up into the end. And that's really dependent on the number of bosses that you're going to fight, is when that game is going to end. The difficulty of the game, whether you're playing solo or cooperative, is going to change the end game results and how many quests you need to have beaten and how many bosses you need to beat. Yeah, there's a difference between quests and boss, and at least one or two of the bosses also are quest kind of things. It crosses over nicely, very smoothly, and just when I'm playing the game, I'm really feeling immersed in this world because of that. Even though it's tough as nails, and I do feel like the game is punishing me sometimes, it's still a really fun journey through Novus. Now, each of the bosses in this game, when it's time to confront them, and there's a great advancement system, going from lesser bosses, you could call them, to the tougher bosses. That's done very well. You definitely don't want to encounter one of the tougher ones in the beginning of the game, and it's geared that way, much like a series of modules in D&D that you're advancing through. Now, these bosses, actually, to me, coming from my long background in D&D, do feel like a classic climax for old school D&D modules. That's that the bosses, these end encounter scenes, definitely have a feeling of when I'm walking into them. And in most cases, you're not really walking into it. You're setting up. You know where you are. You know where you're going. But it's still when I walk into the boss scene, the boss fight, I feel like it is the end of a classic old school D&D module. And how can that not be fun? This game does. It pulls together so many fun aspects of D&D world exploration, questing, as well as, encounters on the road. You have your encounter cards, your adventure cards, and you get to fight monsters along the way, maybe run away from monsters, maybe get beaten by monsters sometimes. All while you're trying to acquire and finish quests, because there are decks and decks in this game, and there's more than enough quests for replayability to show a unique face every time. So I really think that this pulls together a lot of different D&D feeling aspects. So if you're into more of the world exploration and questing style aspects of the game, then please go learn more about Legends of Novus. My number 2 favorite game that feels like Dungeons and Dragons. Fantasy Flight Games' Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth. This Fantasy Flight Games has a few games that, yes, could have honestly been on this title list of games, right? I know that. But I chose this because out of their fantasy games, this is based on Lord of the Rings. And as most people know, Lord of the Rings, J.R. Tolkien was one of the influences of Gary Gygax. From what I've heard, it wasn't his biggest. He was a bigger fan of Fritz Lieber, with Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, and of Robert E. Howard and his Conan stuff. But still, this played an important part, either way, regardless of whether that's true or not. It did play an important part of the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. So that is why the Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth has made it to this spot, this number 2 spot for my favorite games that feel like Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, after playing this game even the first time, I already was thinking to myself, can there actually be a more thematically immersive Lord of the Rings board game? I don't think there is. If you disagree with me, I'm not mad at you. If you disagree with me, just put the title that you think is a more thematically immersive Lord of the Rings encounter game, world-setting game. Put that down in the comments, because I want to see that game. I do, because this does everything about this game. Just literally grabs you by the throat and drags you into Middle-earth. You can't avoid it. It's made to do that, and it does it perfectly. I mean, and look at the game. There's elves, there's dwarves, there's orcs, goblins, wizards. Yes, this is Lord of the Rings. But you know what? At its heart, even though it came first, it still sounds like Dungeons and Dragons. If you gave the Lord of the Rings description to someone that knew what Dungeons and Dragons was, but you didn't tell them it was Lord of the Rings, there's a very good chance they would guess you're telling them about a D&D game. I believe that, because the two are very similar. And it feels good. It really does. The similarity between the two and the feeling that it gives me when I'm reading one or playing one, it does often make me think of the other. Now, also, because this is an FFG game, it is a growing, living game. So if you want to be involved in a D&D style game that's not Dungeons and Dragons, for whatever reason you want to play a D&D style game that's not D&D, then this is the game that you might be interested in, because it is continuously growing. There are already multiple expansions out for this game, and as far as I know, they're planning on future expansions for the next several years. So you are going to see growth in this world setting. Even though it's not a living card game, it is kind of a living game in a sense, with the amount of growth that they plan for things like this. So you could be into this for the long run for a while. And that will definitely give you your fix. So yeah, if you're interested in Lord of the Rings as much as you are Dungeons and Dragons, and for some reason you don't know about this yet, please go check out Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth. My number one favorite game that feels like Dungeons and Dragons, by Hasbro, Hero Quest. So this has recently been redone, as you probably already know, and you've seen my videos. I have it, I've played it, I've showcased it here. I'm going to continue doing that in the future. It's not over yet. But this game is 100, to me anyway, it is 100% completely inspired and is like a direct homage to things like that came before, like Dungeons and Dragons, like Robert E. Howard, like Lord of the Rings, and even other earlier role-playing games, dare I say, like Tunnels and Trolls. This does have an aspect and a feel of homage to all of those games. And I honestly feel that if it wasn't for those games, we wouldn't see this, which is another reason why it's on the spot. And because it fills so many niches, I think, and it just fills me with a lot of joy ever since childhood, it's on the number one spot, because it has everything pretty much rolled into one. The way the board comes together, laid out like a DM's map, and some individuals, I haven't done this yet, I want to do it, some individuals have blacked out, they have pieces to black out the entire dungeon, and then they get to reveal it piece by piece just as the players are seeing it. Really does, I think, step up and notch up a bit the feel of the Dungeons and Dragons game. This now kind of feels like a party that's mapping as they are going along. Nice! Okay, I know I didn't start with this, but you probably want to hear this by now. The minis, the miniatures, whether you're talking the old school game that's cardboard with a little bit of plastic, or the newer updated version where everything is all solid plastic pieces, they are amazing to look at. If you are a painter, unlike me, these are things you probably are dying to paint. And it's not just the miniatures of the barbarian and the dwarf and the wizard and the elf and the others, but it's also of the furniture pieces, these 3D terrain pieces. They have blown me away ever since I saw them. And I've always thought that why don't every single board game do something like this? Well, now I'm older and I obviously know it has a lot to do with money and how much they think I and others will pay for this if every company did this. So I understand. But I still love it, and I still think more games that have it would be more games that I buy. Because I'm a sucker for this kind of stuff. But not just because it has it, but they're really good quality. They look fantastic, even unpainted. Just sitting there, how can you ignore them? The game is called an adventure system. And the reason for that is because just like Dungeons and Dragons, it is made to grow. It is made to have campaign expansions, which it already has 2 of, not counting the Mythic tier level where you get another 3. Okay? It already has 2. And I know they're going to come out with more because this was such a massive success. They've been a little wishy-washy on it, but trust me, if by the time of this filming and drop, well, I know by the time of this filming they're not planning anything. Who knows about when this drops? But it's still, there's going to be more. You know there's going to be more. And it also allows you to really be a DM in the sense that you can write your own adventures. It's made specifically really for us to do with it what we want. A lot of people house rule things like dual weapon use, like climbing on the furniture for improvements in your armor class and your 2-hit. It's not in the rules, but a lot of people house rule these things because they want to see them in the game, and they're hoping that in future listen to me, in future expansions, we're going to see new rules that add in things like this. But like D&D, you can house rule, no problem. Who cares? As long as the new gamers at your table know what you're doing differently in the game, it's fine. Go ahead, do it. I give you permission. You don't need it though, but I give it to you. So Hero Quest is right now on my list, currently the #1 most feels like Dungeons and Dragons game. But who knows? I'm still waiting for Return to Dark Tower. So by this time next year, this list could be different.